interactive storytelling with Unfold Studio. If you didn't grab a sheet when you walked in to write a text message story, we're going to invite you to do that. And I think we'll give you a couple more minutes to write. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing we should have put, you're not going to be required to share anything you don't want to share.
Okay.
So you can get real on paper and you don't have to like tell it to the strangers around you. Yeah, if you don't want to.
Okay, so at the risk of interrupting you, because you're already writing, we're really nervous that people would walk in and be like, nah, pass. So thank you for engaging. I'm Corey Rogers. I'm a digital learning consultant at Grantwood AEA.
And I'm Chris Proctor. I am finishing my PhD in learning sciences and technology design at Stanford, but I live in Philadelphia. And I did my dissertation research with Corey and some teachers in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah, so circuitous, that's the right word. Circuitous route to meeting each other, but it's really awesome. So we're going to share interactive storytelling with Unfold Studio. How many of you read the keynote? I was thrilled when she started talking about Untold Stories because that's really what Unfold Studio lets you do. So it's super exciting. Oops, you did that. And you did that. So one thing I do want to mention to you is, it might be a little bit hard to see, but the bottom right-hand corner is a link for resources. And so it says dlgwaea.org/itech.html. And if you go there, you will see the resources for this presentation. So there are links with resources for Unfold Studio, and then our contact information is there as well. And it's at the bottom right-hand corner as we present today. So just a heads up, that's how you get resources from us. Come on, Google.
Well, while we bring it up, basically the plan for today is we wanted to talk very quickly about interactive storytelling and why we think it's neat and how it fits into sort of a bigger picture of what we're trying to do with computer science and literacy and related kinds of ideas in education. And then we want to spend most of our time today actually diving in and doing it, because I think in our experience as teachers, actually doing it is the best way as a teacher or as someone who supports teachers to really understand what it is and what it might be. I do want to note, and we'll note this a couple times, we have a session tomorrow too that we want to invite you to, where we're actually going to have a bunch of 7th graders who were part of the curriculum unit where we were teaching this. And so if you want to really feel what it was like to be in the classroom and to have them present to you some of their stories, we invite you to join us tomorrow. But today, we're here as writers.
Tomorrow at 11:15.
Yeah.
I can't remember the room.
306.
306 is the room. Oh, jeez. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and talk about it, and I'll get this open again.
So this idea of interactive storytelling came from a bunch of different places, but the kind of storytelling we're talking about is, did any of you ever read Choose Your Own Adventure books when you were growing up? Where you get to the bottom of the page, and if you want to go into the dark cave, you turn to page 45, and if you want to run away, you turn to page 57, and the vast majority of endings are some horrible death, and you try to This was a very popular thing in the 80s, the sort of text-based video games before graphics got popular, and then they died because graphics turned out to be really good for games. And now they're kind of coming back, and there's an increasing amount of kind of interactivity in our culture. So, for example, there was a Black Mirror episode called Bandersnatch, did anybody play this? Where it was actually an interactive TV show where you could sort of choose how you wanted the TV show to go. And so this is becoming part of our media and part of our lives. I got interested in it because I was an English teacher and I was a computer science teacher. And I was profoundly moved by the possibilities of creating spaces for literacy in an English language arts classroom, where people can read and write what matters to them, their own stories. They can represent themselves, they can bring their cultures and who they are into the classroom. And they can use it to change the school and make places for them to be and to let parts of themselves exist at school that didn't have a place to be before. And I found as I shifted to teaching computer science that the same thing was true, but I saw that this was not the main way we were teaching computer science. And so in my PhD research, I've been exploring what I'm calling a literacy-based approach to computer science that is centering first, definitely wanting students to get the skills, right? But centering first and foremost the practices of representing ourselves, bringing ourselves in, telling our stories, building our worlds, which increasingly are built out of digital stuff anyway, right? We live, at least partly, constantly in digital worlds. Growing up today, even when they're at school, even when they're in the classroom, they're also online. They're also participating in these networks that are very much places where their identities are grounded. And so we got interested in this idea of interactive storytelling, a kind of programming that is designed to feel first and foremost like writing. And in fact, if you just start free writing the way that you might in a journal or a diary, that is a program in this programming language. But then you can add features in to create interactivity to let the reader, or you might say player of the story, not just read it as a static sort of linear narrative, but to give them choices, to let them participate, and ultimately to make it as much like a game as you want it to be. So that's what we're going to share with you today. How does it fit into other kinds of things? So, look, I was this kind of teacher, I was this kind of teacher, and I'm really interested in this too. There are a couple places where this fits in. One, if you're primarily here because you're interested in computer science, then I would pitch to you that a literacy-based approach to computer science is precisely what we need to address the huge equity issues that we have in computer science. I think there's sort of an irony to the image we have of the leaky pipeline, of like, why are all of these people falling out of the pipeline to get into STEM careers? Where we're asking, like why are so many people who are marginalized, women and people of color particularly, not like staying in the pipeline? But we don't do enough questioning of like, what's at the end of that pipeline and why are people not being attracted to it? It's more sort of like, how do we keep them in? But we're not questioning like, what is this picture of sort of STEM or computer science as represented that is actually doesn't feel attractive, doesn't feel in the end like it represents and has places for enough people. I would like to see a vision in the same way that, switching back again to English language arts, we have this there's not one kind of writing, right? There's like a gajillion kinds of writing in our society. And we try to bring a lot of them into our literacy practices in school. In the same way, computers are everywhere, computational stuff is everywhere. I would like to see a gajillion different kinds of computer science that are all legitimate kinds of computer science that are all coming into our schools. Not a sort of like narrowing down to like, this is the right way to do it. On the flip side, there's tons of kinds of things that the main work of English language arts teachers and social studies teachers, questioning things like, who am I? How do I understand myself? How do I fit into society? What kinds of roles might I want to have in society in the future? What is a just sort of vision of society? How might I participate in making that happen? Computational stuff needs to get into that too and help make that happen. And I don't see enough of that. I see more often sort of little like tricks with computer science that you can do with texts, but that are not the main work of what English and humanities teachers are actually most interested in. That's where I think that power comes. There's huge amounts of work also of bringing the online worlds where a lot of messed up stuff happens, right? Into schools where we can create safe places for young people to become leaders and learn how to process that, because they're having experiences even at the age of 12 and 13 that we do not have access to. We're not allowed to see the kinds of things that are happening to them. So we need to find ways to support them indirectly. I'm also interested in building in criticality, of starting to think about what are the ways in which we might be unsatisfied with the kinds of roles that the digital media ecosystem offers us. We don't have enough practices of questioning not just how do I stay safe when I make a Facebook and Instagram account, but how might I question, like, why am I being asked to interact with my friends through this interface in this way? Why can't I interact with them in different kinds of ways? Why is it counting these kinds of things, these likes? What is that doing to the kinds of relationships I have with people, and how might they be otherwise? We don't have that practice of questioning yet, but I would really like to see that happen. So that's some of the things we're after. I talked too long.
You're good.
Look, this is what one of our students said. She'll be here tomorrow. Come see us. I use storytelling to tell things about my own way of life in an amplified way. Like with my story, realizing emotions that she didn't recognize. She's writing a story with a character who is coming to some awareness of feelings that she's having and starting to process them. And she lets you as the player make choices about whether you want to acknowledge those feelings inside of yourself. Really cool stuff happening rhetorically with interactivity that's not possible with a linear story.
Oh, okay. So I borrowed this from Jenny this morning because I thought it was so great when she talked about using technology to enhance and connect with each other. What was really cool in McKinley was seeing the kids interact with each other's stories and support each other and acknowledge, like, oh, I feel that way too, or I experienced that too. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you it was perfect, so we had lots of barriers that we dealt with at McKinley that we'll share a little bit tomorrow. But what I can tell you is there was magic when the kids trusted each other to share really personal stuff. There was a 13-year-old boy that wrote about his aunt's house, and I got weepy. It was beautiful. And he was like in with the tomfoolery in the classroom and not always making great choices. And it was really cool to see him go like, why are you upset? And I was like, I'm not upset, I'm moved. Like, it was beautiful what you wrote about your aunt's house, and I got to make choices about where I went. And your words have power, not only with me, but with your classmates. His classmates started going like, well, what's this lady upset about? I want to read that. And so getting them to connect each other and feel heard and feel noticed, I'm not sure that that's something I could say happened in my computer science class when I was teaching HTML. But it was happening at McKinley when we were using Unfold to engage kids in computer science and telling their stories and feeling heard. So it was really powerful. It was like, yes, this is what we're going to do later today. So I see a connection, I want to share it. Okay, so you have a story that you wrote. And so what we want to invite you to do is start to think about that as a story with other possibilities. I saw some of you were already flipping that sheet over as you were writing. How many of you felt a little scared? How many of you have experience with flow charting or writing pseudocode? Okay. Okay, so here's the thing. Those of you just went like this. Like no one went, I do. And so we don't want you to be afraid, but this is a graphic organizer to get you to start to think about the structure and unfold. Is that fair? You should jump in. Okay, so we thought part of this is getting you to think about this not being linear, right? So choose your own adventure story is not linear. Oh, did we lose? Oh no, I know what you have to do. I have to go to a different tab. Okay, so we thought it would be helpful to maybe show you an example. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in so you can read this. Here's mine. So what I can tell you is this is based on a text conversation I had with my 12-year-old, I had with my 12-year-old daughter. So we thought this would be a good example. Chris said, we were planning, let's come up with an example, and I said, oh, I know a good one where I wish I would have handled things a little bit differently by text. How many of you have an adolescent child? How many of you have gotten a text message in the middle of the day when you know they shouldn't be on their phone, but they're freaking out? Yeah, okay, so here's what I got. I got screenshots of these two things. If you don't want to be friends, then just stop. I don't know what I did, but you've been ignoring us and being super rude lately. And then another screen capture. Listen, if you don't want to be friends, then I guess I won't be. Thanks for coming to my B-Day, and I hope you enjoy your hydro class. From my daughter, 11, maybe, not sure, okay? So my responses are in white as an adult. So I said, are these texts from Susie and Claire? And the response back was, yes. I appreciate the punctuation. Would have liked a little more information. And so my response as a parent was to say, did you respond? And the response back was, no. Punctuation, she's got it down. So then what I responded back with was, how are you feeling about it? Would you feel comfortable saying you still want to be friends? You could talk with me about it tonight. Because as an adult, I'm thinking, why am I texting her about this? But this is how she's communicating with her friends. So when Chris talks about that the kids are living in this digital world, like this is the reality. I don't engage in these types of conversations with adults, with my parents, with my husband, with Chris, right? So these types of interactions, I believe, should happen face to face, but for my daughter, they're not. So then I got a, can I call you during passing? And I said, absolutely, because I am a mom, and I don't want to have a crying 12-year-old that comes home. And then the response I got back was, thanks. Okay. So, what we wanted to start to think about now, and what we did with kids, is, okay, so let's think about this in terms of a branching story. So, same story. And what we're starting to introduce for you is the syntax, or how else could we call this? The syntax is the direction of your code. And so in Unfold, you have these story points. So story point A is going to diverge or be directed to here. And as you can see, that's that same thing I just read to you. So if, in Unfold Studio, a plus sign is where there's a choice. And that's text that the player can click on. I'm right in this reading, sorry. It's text that the player can click on. Here, there's only one choice, but they're still clicking. And what it's going to do when they click is take them to B. So see, there's that very grammatically correct but abrupt yes that you saw from Rory. And then here's the response that I had. So did you respond? And it was no. Now, this is a point in the story where I probably, as a parent, could have responded differently, and this is where we can bring in choice in the narrative for the user as well. And so, what do you think? What is another way I could have responded? We're going to ask you to help us.
Instead of saying, you mean instead of you asking, did you respond?
Yeah.
Oh. How are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
Or you could have said your mama with a question mark.
I could have said bummer with a question mark.
Yeah. Do you have permission of your phone?
So here's the thing that happened for me. Way too late, right? Is that about the point where, no, I know what it was. It was when it was, can I call you during passing? Then I went, oh my God, she's in class. So some context for you is that my family just relocated from Waterloo to Iowa City about a year and a half ago now. And so I have a 12-year-old who's very angry at her parents for moving her and trying really hard to build relationships. And so I immediately went into, how do I help her to advocate for herself, but also keep some friends? We just got friends, right? So that didn't occur to me as a parent until it was, can I call you during class? And I was like, oh gosh, she's in school, she shouldn't have her phone, she shouldn't be texting me, right? But I think that's where there's opportunity, like the social emotional learning piece to me is great with kids to help them say like, okay, I can't take back that I was texting with her, but I can be reflective with her about what are other choices we could have made. It gets at if-else structure for coding, it gets at narrative structure for literacy, and it gets at social-emotional. I made that choice, but what can I learn from that moving forward? How might I react differently? And so it checks all these boxes of the things we want our kids to learn.
What do you think she might say?
Oh, what do I think her response would be? If I had said, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Fine, period. I do think that's what she would have said. Or okay, but it would have been O and then K. We're working on that grammar. Yeah, there wouldn't have been a period there.
So one thing I'll interject here is
Yeah.
for this story, we have required a certain structure as sort of a like sentence starter kind of thing. But once you're feeling good with the Untitled Studio syntax, you can go to town and you can make all kinds of crazy stories, and you'll see this. But for here, basically we've decided that something happens, something else happens, you get two choices, and no matter what you choose, this comes back to the same part of the story. And then it splits and has different endings. So this is somewhat artificial, but here we have to decide how to bring this story back to that same...
To the can I call you during.
Yeah, so now you have to sort of respond, and
She says okay.
yeah.
Could you tell me more? Because then it would be no, period. From my But I feel like that would be, if I said, could you tell me more, then her logical response could be, can I just call you? I don't want to type this anymore. And let's be real, she's not typing any of this. She's voice dictating it, right? She's talking to Siri, because that's what she does. That's what a lot of kids do, right?
Yeah.
Huh? Oh, then she was type C.
That would be very simple.
She went to the bathroom.
She went to the
Yeah.
bathroom, yeah.
She's terrified of getting in trouble, so I'm sure she wasn't using the voice typing in class. She would have gotten it. She's going to be so mad at me and the videotaping, so it's going to be great. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to show them?
Can I propose we switch over to the Unfold interface? So you're now looking at Unfold Studios, Unfold.studio, and we'll go there in just a second. But if you've ever worked with Scratch, the structure is very similar, where in Scratch you can play the project, the game, and then you can see the code. You can always see the code that makes the thing happen. So here, the programming language is on this side, and the actual playing of the game is over here. And what you'll see is that the code here is just about the same. If this is your first time programming, fantastic. Here's all you need to know. Change the stuff that's in black text, and don't change the stuff that's not in black text, and everything will be fine. And if you change the other stuff, crazy things will happen. But I think we should play this for a second, just this is we haven't yet written out the alternate versions. Well, let's actually add in the alternate versions, and then we can play the whole thing once, and then we can start thinking about how you can do this yourself. So we decided that here on line 19,
Oops. Okay.
what was the other thing we were going to think about saying?
I can't remember the
How did that make you
numbers.
feel?
You think I can remember
Or
that?
how are you doing?
How are you doing?
How are you doing? Yeah.
Okay. Everyone's watching you. Hi. There's no pressure. Okay. How are you feeling?
So this would take you to part D, which is down here. So then here, we have, this is where your daughter eloquently tells us, okay.
Thank you. Chris has also met my daughter, so it's really fun.
Yeah. And then 29 is, Corey, this is your response. I forget what that was. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure.
And actually, that's enough for now. Let's not finish articulating the rest of it, but let's go ahead and save this one. And let's play this. And we have to. One of the things that we've done is we've actually developed some full curriculum unit and a bunch of pedagogical strategies around this to support using it in the ways that we're interested in doing it. And one of them is a particular way of presenting or performing these kinds of stories. Because this is really doing some of the same kinds of things that make theater a really generative activity in middle school and high school. And so, because you're the author and it's your voice, I think you should be the narrator of this story. But a thing that we came up with actually at McKinley that works really well is that the person who's sharing the story invites somebody else to be the player. So I'll invite you to invite an audience member to be the player of the story now.
I would like to be the player. Come on up. Thank you. Yes. Sorry, we left that
I
out.
rescind my vote.
We don't have a
So your only job as the player is when we get to a choice point, you have to decide which choice you want to make. And there's not that many choices right now, so it's not a hard job right now.
Okay, so we have the 2 screen captured comments. I'm not going to read them again for time. So what would you like to choose?
Are these texts from Susie and Larry?
Her response is yes. Ooh, I'm gonna fall. Okay, then. So what would you like to choose? Did you respond or how were you feeling?
How are you feeling?
You still had okay.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about it?
Can I play during passing? You'll see we didn't finish this choice, so this is not a good choice.
So what would you like to choose?
I would put absolutely that.
Thanks, and then there is a choice point here.
You bet.
Thanks, I feel better.
Very nice.
And once we feel better, there's no punctuation. Thank you. Very nice.
So one of the things that, just to sort of interject here for a moment, that was really interesting about this was some students got really into the text messaging interface. Is just one thing you can do with this. Normally it's just regular text, but it turns out to be super interesting because a lot of drama goes down on text messaging, and being able to put the texts into your story lets you talk about them in a story. But some of the students got really into these stories that present real important choices to the author, or to the player, and then they actually became these like conversations in the class. Because especially if you write the story in such a way that the person playing the story has to make moral decisions about what to do, or has to do something that makes them a witness to something in the story, or makes them sort of a perpetrator of something, like a story about bullying, where as the player you actually participating in making choices about bullying, like deciding not to protect your friend who's getting bullied because you want to keep yourself safe. Now you're part of it, right? And so that became a really interesting experience of playing these stories in person in class. But for now, what I'd like to do is take this example and now think about what you might be able to do with your own stories. And so I'd like to take a couple of minutes to just brainstorm. So I'd like you to find a group, maybe like 3 to 5, whatever looks good. Make sure everyone around is included. Take 2 or 3 minutes. Anyone who's interested, share some of the things you were thinking about, maybe that you did in your free writing, or if you don't want to share that, some other kinds of thing that you think would be interesting stories to tell here. But just share a little bit of what you think you might be interested in writing about. Just a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back and show you how to do it. Go for it.
I right away started when I first walked in. I got here really early, so my first thought was all those hilarious text fails that you see online, where somebody misunderstands or hits the wrong person or something. So I was thinking comedy when I first started writing, and then I just made up it's not even a real exchange. It's just assuming a wife is saying, guess what? Someone you know is pregnant. What? Who? Guess 3 tries. You? Is it? Yes, it's me. Just something like that.
I was just thinking, just sort of like a mystery business. Your own adventure type of thing.
Yes.
If I'm just like typing it out.
Yeah.
I love what I do because I can like, if I say something,
So you could have story writing happens pretty deep with syntax or the techie side of it.
I'm out with my friend.
Okay, 30 seconds.
Waterway.
Oh,
How about you guys?
Okay.
Animals. Okay.
It wouldn't be like. Strawberry Hill.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry. So I want to just really quickly show you what this is going to look like when I actually do it in a moment. And I think we have enough time, which I'm thrilled by, to actually do this and then perform a couple of these stories, which I'm excited about. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah. There it is. Power. So, in a moment, we're going to ask you to go to a particular story on Unfold Studio. And if you haven't got a device with you, pair programming is fantastic. You can team up with somebody else, that's great. But one of the ways to help people get into this is that we have story templates that are kind of written out, and you can fork them. This is a thing you can do with software that you can't do in an English class that well. You can take code, make your own copy of it, and change just the parts you want to change. So, in just a moment, you're going to go to this URL, but don't yet, just watch here for a second, and then you can, that way you'll know what to actually do. When you get to the story, it looks like this. If you click on Show Code, that brings up this interface where you can actually change it. And this is called Branching Story. Yeah, what a great name. Good job, guys. And so what you're going to do when you get here is you're going to click Fork to make your own copy. And I should say that when you go to Unfold Studio, you're not logged in, right? If you think you might be interested in doing this in the future, you could quickly make an account. You're welcome to do that. Or you can make a story that's called a public story, where you're not logged in. You can just do it anonymously. Those go away after a while, but it's really nice for being able to just jump in and not have to fuss with it. So it's up to you whether you want to actually make an account or just make a public story. But once you've got a fork, then this is yours. You can change it. And so, Corey, do you want to just sort of make sort of a random change to that real quick, just so I like to do this whenever I'm starting to program in a new interface, to just make some little changes to make sure they work. Yeah, so great. So we replace that option with dot. You can see she's changing just the text in black. Oh, great. So you still up I am now, sorry. Or I'm going to. Are you going to be in trouble? Yeah, so let's just save that just so we can see, just make sure it actually works. So when you hit save, then it actually runs, and you can see it's not got your content in it. And if you're not in a text messaging mood, you can check out these little hashtags, and it won't show them as text messages anymore. And then you got it, that's it. And one more thing is, if you made an account, then your stories by default are not shared, which is just like Scratch, if you used that before. It's kind of also a sort of default assumption. If you're writing stuff, it's nice to have it private and decide when you want to share it, right? So Corey might not share this one because we just started, but she would hit share, and then it would show up on the homepage. And so what we'll hopefully do in about 8 or 10 minutes is we'll have a number of people who've made stories that they have published and shared, and then we can perform a few of them. So I think what we should do now is actually jump in. This URL, unfold.studio/stories/8054. This takes you to the branching story template, which you can then fork yourself. So make an account if you like, fork the story, add your own content in. One thing I want to suggest, and this is now switching, it's funny how you switch back and forth from writing process to programming practice. But one thing I think is a good idea in English class and is essential in computer science class is don't write your whole program before you test it. Make a little change first and save it and make sure it works, right? And then you can go on and add more and add more. And I've had people come to me with interactive stories that are 2,000 lines long and are hopelessly broken. I don't know. It's good to sort of add a little bit at a time. So let's go ahead and try this. Even if you have a device and you want to pair up with someone else, that's fantastic. We will come around and help, and we'll check back in again in about 8 minutes, I think. What time are we at? Yeah, 7 minutes. Let's do that. So let's start.
So every other letter,
Yes, the way I search it was the big box is the same percentage. And then all of these sort of choice points. And what I was thinking was like, if you're like playing and you're clicking and stuff, it's kind of like you're like playing next. But maybe a couple of minutes is playing out the way that you want to do.
You good?
No.
Okay, what can I do to help?
So, do I change it here?
So this is the text that'll show the text. And then this is the text. No, so this is what you put on the page.
Okay.
So like that, that will be whatever shows up here for the player to click on. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Okay. So you go back to 4.
Did you? You are no. So you want to save it? Or just like in scratch what you're doing next. It's like making your own copy.
Oh.
By story, you're like choosing it from four. And if they don't, so I get
Okay.
This is working amazing.
Okay, we were.
Oh yeah, we have lots of time. Yes.
And it looks like, they actually made a change recently, I forgot about it. If you're not logged in, you have to store it. So what you can do is only can have the
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I did that.
Yeah, so now, like, for example, try changing one.
All right. Okay.
One quick announcement, I'm sorry for this. I was having trouble with robots, and I disabled the ability for people who are not logged in to make forks of stories, because there were a lot of forks of stories. So if you have not made an account, what you can do is you can just go to this URL, copy all of the code, just like with Control-C, and then make a new story and paste it. So sorry about that. And if anyone's having trouble getting this working, I'm coming around.
But now it's just like, can you just keep on voting and figure it out? And she's like, to be honest, no. I was like, to be honest, yes.
They're asking you to go on Chris's back. Da, da, da.
You did do it.
It was.
Yeah.
I was on it before.
I'm asking you for da, 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 sound of that's it. Chris just do a voice.
I'm gonna shower in it. I'm gonna work out, and that's it.
You won't
No.
Okay.
Like if I wanted to say something, I want to know choice here.
Oh,
Okay,
so
then I would be
so
like,
if you want
So
choice there, I have to say go to C.
go to
yeah.
so
So
the username is made.
so what we didn't do.
I've never had it. I'm sorry. discover of it. So,
Hey.
yeah. I'm not thrilled with it. I think what we should do in the interest of time is I could just.
Well, or is
I was just going to execute the statement while I aired out.
Oh, cool, okay.
But it won't even let me go back.
this is the check. The blessing is that the stories and then some people are it's telling
Because it's logged in, problematic will happen.
which is this header in the code. It makes this text here.
Sorry about that.
Part of my code understanding.
I'll add it to my.
So it's kind of like if you
Actually, it's getting short now.
if this happens, go here else.
So like, so it's going to say stop, and then it's going to say, like it gives to, we wanted to have a choice of yes.
Yes. There's right, and they understand how variables in math, and now we can help them with how it works on the other side. And we should, Chris is up there. There's a big circle of story people. How many times have you visited Chris? Every time you visited, the kids are learning to do stories. Every 15 seconds, make a count. Well, I'm not sure how to and spend them. And when you spend them, I take them away. They have understand but if they have a better understanding of this, it's easier.
The time is up.
My brain nerves are super fun. Right. Oh, I forgot. Sorry. That sounds real official. Oh, I just set a timer.
So I think we'd better stop, even though that's an absurdly short amount of time to write a story in. Did anybody make any semblance of a story that's enough, that's shareable? Would you be willing to share?
Can I type 3 more words?
Yeah, please. Sorry? Yes. All right, so is your story shared? Great, so it's private right now, hit share. And it's 9232. Just for you, Arlo. But actually, now that you've shared it, it'll probably be on the homepage for Unfold Studio. Because the homepage for Unfold Studio has a balance of the stories that have gotten the most attention and love from the community, and also the stories that are newest and freshest. In the same way that Reddit and other websites have a balance of stories that are getting a lot of attention and love, but also what's new. And oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe the amount of energy that students went into trying to figure out the algorithm for what gets stories on the homepage. And then, like this story, fork it please if you agree. And they're trying to do that. Yeah.
Julie, would you come up and narrate?
Oh, sure.
Do you mind?
And you have to get a volunteer to play it too.
Okay, Jeff's coming with me then.
Jeff was volunteer.
So, you still up?
I was just about to turn off the light.
Oh, sorry, can we talk?
Sure, what's up?
I need to cancel breakfast.
Why?
I had a car accident on my way home tonight.
What happened?
A deer and on
Were you okay?
Yes, but my car's not.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So you might have felt a little bit of the tingle that I felt, even in that very short amount of writing for the story. Those moments when you can see that there are different choices that the story might take. And in fact, one of the things that's cool about this story is the first branching point goes to a place and then comes back together again. So in terms of where the program goes, it has no effect, right? It comes back together again anyway. But as a player, you don't know that. And actually, just as one of the examples of the kinds of computational stuff that comes out of this, I had a student who is actually coming tomorrow, who wrote a story that was like, choose the feeling that is in your soul, choose the feeling that's in your eyes, choose all these personal characteristics. Fork, 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 fork. She has 2 forks, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32, and then 64, and then 128, and 256, and 1024, and then 2056. And at that point, she comes to me and she's like, Chris, I don't think I can do another version because 2 times 2056 is too many for me to do. And I said, you're right. And like that's a really interesting computer science moment where like even the most sort of buttoned up sort of like this isn't computer science sort of person would be like, yeah, that's computer science for sure. But it's in the context of narrative where we have to think now about, as an author, how do I manage this? How do I bring some of these branches back together again? As a computer scientist, all of a sudden now, it's, for those of us who are like thinking about CS stuff more, like now how do I think about state? How do I think about managing variables so that I don't have to have the flow of the program branch too many times, but I can still inject variables in here so that no matter what choice you make, I can still stay in one place and still let the story represent the choices you've made. Cool stuff.
So I think we have like 5 minutes roughly. So we'd like you to just take a second, turn and talk with that, maybe with the group that you shared your stories with, if you don't mind. What are some reasons you might use Untitled Studio? And then how might you use it? And we'll have you share some of those and then answer some questions. Some questions came up when I went around. We might want to surface for everybody in here. So we'll give you like 2 minutes. Go ahead and turn and talk about those 2 reflection questions, please.
Well, what'd you think?
I like it.
Yeah, once you get the...
The storyline is going here. Or would you... But then you can build your own by taking in characters. So I could have everybody have one story, and then I can go back. Add in another option. Okay.
Which would be the other choice,
That's up to him at the time.
Yeah, that might be.
We're just kind of like if you were doing a longer story, how to keep track of where the different storylines are going. Instead of going back and forth, can you write it as like F goes to G and then H goes to L, and then F goes to Q.
And in fact, those are variables. So it's more than A and B. It's better to have like a car accident, right? So you can actually keep in mind for yourself.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be. Okay. Yeah. So, let me turn this back on. So Julie's asking you a question. Do you want to say it one more time?
I was thinking if you're doing longer stories, how you would keep track of the coding for the storylines. Like if you have to keep kind of flipping back between choices and storylines.
So, as a scaffold to help you understand, Chris named those story points, A, B, C, D, E, right? But you can name them. So just like with computer science, we'd ask kids to give variables a meaningful name. So we try not to call the variable A, we call it apple, because we're going to keep track of how many apples somebody has, or currency, because we're going to keep track of how much money they have. Those story points you can give a name, like car accident, or the name of the person, or the place that they're, but you give it a meaningful name because those are points in your story that then make it easier to code it to go to those places. Does that make sense?
Yeah, go ahead. That's a really good question. So I like the physical handout, did you guys do an activity like that with the students where they could write out and plan that and then transfer, so you're also getting your writing skills?
Yeah, and actually, if you click the help link at the bottom, or if you go to docs.unfold.studio, is the documentation site where there's now an extensive user guide on the full documentation for the language, which many students just go to town reading all the crazy stuff. It's a full programming language. You can do whatever you want with it, but there's also a section for pedagogy and curriculum, and there's a lot of stuff up there now, but soon there will be the full curriculum unit that has been revised from what we did there and then from other places too. Are there English teachers here? So there's a series called Shakespeare Set Free that I really love, which is these books of curriculum units that are that's my model, where you can take that, if you have 6 weeks, you can just drop it in, starting on Monday, good to go. Or you can take lessons a la carte, and they're really rich and sort of have good justifications for here's why we're doing this. And so that's what the unit's going to be, that's going to be there, and it'll have all of the handouts and materials that we designed there. So it'll be ready to go, because I feel without that, it's hard to be ready to go with it.
But so here's the caveat, I would say. Those of you that have taught computer science, they don't want to use a planning template. I think the same for English teachers, right? They don't want to use a graphic organizer either. They just want to write. So what I saw in the classroom, because Chris came for weeks at a time, but then I was kind of there intermittently with the kids, was that they didn't want to use a graphic organizer. They'd get a story like Chris said, and they'd be like, it's not working. And then I would take them back to the graphic organizer and say, I can't help you until I can make sense of the story. And then we take the story they had and plug it into the graphic organizer, and then we could both make better sense of what they wanted. It's just like pseudocode and flowcharting, right? Is that until you can convince kids it's important to think, as a way to think about where they want the story or the code to go, until they have a purpose, it's really hard to convince them. But once there was a purpose, then those were the kids that were the best at also convincing their classmates to use the graphic organizer or the flowchart, whatever language you want to use, because they had social capital in the classroom that Chris and I lack, because we're the adults in the room, right? And so I think kind of finding those ins pedagogically and from your experience is what really helped them to do it.
The thing I want to add to that is just to emphasize that this is not a metaphor for programming. It's not a metaphor for computer science. This is programming, and that is debugging.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so building those practices here is, one thing I'm interested in is whether a text-based language might actually be easier to move to Python next, because there's been a lot of research showing that it's hard to move off the block-based to text-based. That's future stuff. But I think these kinds of practices are exactly what we're really richly primed to do in a context where, as Corey said, they care already that this is what matters to them because they want to make the story work because it's their story.
We're over time, so thanks for sticking with us. The kids will be with us in room 306. I'm keeping wrong because I can't keep things straight in my life. 306. And so we'd love for you to hear their untold stories, because Unfold Studio allowed them to set their stories free. And then at the back of the room, Julie, you're famous. CSE Iowa is Computer Science Teachers Association. It's like NCTM, but for computer science teachers. You teach computer science whether you have a dedicated course or not. We'd love for you to join us. So there's free stuff, laptop stickers, and a little card that tells you how to join. We're trying to get people organized so you can connect with people like the way Chris and I connected. If you want to connect with someone using Unfold, you can do that through CSTA. So please grab the free stuff and sign up to join us. And then there are 9 more computer science sessions tomorrow at iTech Ron Moreland has one of them. Diana Gears and I have one. There's lots of people in the room doing it, so we'd love for you to join us. And my team has a summer summit in June, so if you'd like to join us, we would love to have you join us. So thanks so much. Chris and I are going to stay here. If you have additional questions, we'd love to talk to you about Unfold. Go ahead, Chris.
One last quick pitch. Unfold Studio is free and open source. It's up there. It's ready to go. If you or folks that you work with are interested in using that to teach, please reach out.